When a family reunion hoping to feel close again, I overheard relatives saying I was only invited out of pity, and in that moment I realized doesn't always mean belonging. Where I cheated on my wife Sarah at her own family reunion, and I need to tell someone before I lose my mind completely. It started with me feeling like an outsider at every family gathering, watching her cousins and uncles share inside jokes while I stood there with my, smiling and nodding like some pathetic hanger-on. After 8 years of marriage, I still felt like I was wearing a visitor's badge. The reunion was at Sarah's Aunt Linda's lake house, and I'd been dreading it for weeks. Sarah kept saying how excited she was for me to really connect with everyone this time, but I knew the truth. I was the charity case they tolerated because I came attached to Sarah. The pity invitations, the polite conversations that died when I walked, the way they'd glance at each other when I tried to contribute to their stories about people I'd never met. I was on my third drink when I overheard Sarah's cousin Mark talking to his wife near the kitchen. I don't know why Linda keeps inviting him to these things. It's not like he's really family. His wife laughed and said, Sarah probably makes her. Know how she is about trying to make everyone feel included, even when they don't belong. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. 8 years. 8 years of birthday cards, Christmas gifts, trying to remember everyone's kids' names. And I was still the outsider they invited out of pity. I went outside to smoke and that's when I met Rachel, Mark's sister-in-law who'd driven from Austin. She was sitting alone on the dock, looking as miserable as I felt. Family functions getting to 2, she asked, passing me her cigarette. I should have walked her way. I should have found Sarah and told her I wanted to leave. Instead I sat down and started complaining about how I never fit in anywhere. How even my own wife's family saw me as some kind of consolation prize they had to tolerate. Rachel listened. Really listened. She told me about her divorce, how she felt invisible in her own, how she understood what it was like to feel like her always on the outside looking in. We talked for 2 hours while the reunion continued without us. When she put her hand on my leg and said, deserve better than feeling like this. I didn't move it away. We ended in her car behind the boat house. I kept telling it wasn't really cheating, just kissing, just touching, just two lonely people finding comfort in each other. But when she unzipped my pants I didn't stop her. I thought about Sarah inside, probably wondering where I was, probably making excuses for why her husband disappeared again. I thought about our 2 kids back home with the babysitter, waiting for us to bring them back presents from the lake. I thought about all of it and I did it anyway. 20 minutes later, I was walking back toward the house with Rachel's number in my phone and her taste still on my lips. Sarah was standing on the porch looking worried. I was getting concerned. Okay, look flushed. I told her I'd been feeling sick and needed air. She immediately put her hand on my forehead, asked if I wanted to leave early, offered to drive home so I could rest. The guilt hit me like a freight train. This woman who loved me enough to make her family include me, who worried about me when I disappeared, who was ready to her own reunion short because she thought I was unwell. And I'd just betrayed her with a stranger behind a boathouse like some teenager. The rest of the weekend was, every time Sarah smiled at me, every time she held my hand or introduced me proudly as her husband, I wanted to disappear. Rachel texted me twice asking when we could meet again. I deleted the messages but I didn't block her number. That should have been my first red flag about how far I was already gone. We drove home Sunday evening with Sarah chattering about how well I'd seemed to connect with everyone this time. She was so happy, talking about maybe hosting Christmas at our place this year, making plans for me to go fishing with her dad next month. I nodded and made appropriate responses while my phone buzzed with another message from Rachel that I was too cowardly to delete. I'm so glad her finally feeling like part of the family, Sarah said as we pulled into our driveway. Our kids ran out to greet us, and I hugged them tight, breathing in their shampoo scent and trying to memorize the moment before everything fell apart. Because even then, I knew I was going to see Rachel again. I met Rachel at a hotel bar in downtown Austin 3 weeks later. I told Sarah I had a work conference, manufactured emails and printed schedules to make it believable. The elaborate lies came so easily it scared me. I was becoming someone I didn't recognize, someone who could look his wife in the eye and lie about where he was spending the weekend. Rachel looked different away from the lake house, more polished, more intentional. She'd clearly put thought into this meeting, while I was still telling it was just dinner between 2 people who understood each other. We talked about our marriages, our disappointments, how we'd both settled for lives that felt too small. She made me feel seen in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Don't have to stay trapped, she said over our 3rd round of drinks. Some people are just meant for bigger things. I should have recognized the line for what it was. But I was so starved for someone to tell me I mattered that I ate it. We went to her hotel room and I crossed every remaining line I'd drawn for. Afterward, lying in sheets that smelled like her perfume, I felt hollowed out and exhilarated at the same time. The affair became a monthly thing. Rachel would text, I'd invent a work trip, and we'd meet in different cities across Texas. Each time I swore it would be the last and each time I found booking another hotel room. The lying got easier and more complex. I opened a separate credit card, started leaving work early to establish alibis, even called Sarah from Rachel's bathroom to tell her I loved her while Rachel listened from the bed. Sarah never suspected. Why would she? I was her husband of 8 years, the father of her children, the man who still brought her coffee every morning and her goodbye. I was getting better at compartmentalizing, at being the husband she expected while living this double that made me feel alive for the first time in years. The kids noticed changes though. 8-year-old Emma asked why I seemed so distracted all the time, why I kept checking my phone during our Saturday morning pancake tradition. 5-year-old Jake started having nightmares and crawling into our bed, sensing something was off even if he couldn't name it. Seem happier lately, Sarah said one evening after the kids were asleep. We were watching TV, her head on my shoulder like we'd done 1,000 times before. More energetic I was worried about after that reunion, but whatever worked through I'm glad. The irony was suffocating. She was attributing my guilt, fueled attentiveness to personal growth, reading my affair, induced wings as signs of renewed commitment to our marriage. I was bringing her flowers to assuage my conscience, and she thought I was being romantic. I was having more with her because sleeping with Rachel made me feel like I owed her something, and she interpreted it as rekindled passion. Everything I did to cope with betraying her, she saw as evidence that our marriage was stronger than ever. The end came suddenly the way these things always do. Rachel's ex-husband found our text messages on her phone and called Sarah directly. I was at work when my phone rang, Sarah's name on the screen, and I knew before I answered that my world was about to collapse. Is there something want to tell me about Rachel Morrison? Sarah's voice was perfectly calm, which was somehow worse than if she'd been screaming. I could have lied. I could have claimed it was a misunderstanding, that Rachel X was trying to cause trouble. For a split second, I even considered it. But something in Sarah's tone told me she already knew everything, and one more lie would only make it worse. Yes, I said, and heard 8 years of marriage in that single word. She hung. When I got home, she was sitting at our kitchen table with printouts of every hotel charge, every suspicious credit card statement, every fabricated work trip I'd taken. She'd done the math, connected the dots, laid out the timeline of my deception with the thoroughness of a prosecutor presenting evidence. The kids are at my mother's, she said without looking at me. I need to pack a bag and leave. Don't make this harder by trying to explain. I wanted to apologize, to beg, to promise it meant nothing and would never happen again. But looking at her face, so empty of the love that had been there just that morning, I realized how those words would sound. It didn't mean nothing. It meant I was willing to rip everything we'd built for a few weekends with someone who made me feel important. I packed 2 suitcases while Sarah sat in our bedroom chair, watching me destroy our one folded shirt at a time. When I was done, she handed me an envelope. Divorce papers will be filed Monday. I'm asking for full custody of the house and half pension. If want to see Emma and Jake, I'll agree to supervised visits until we can work out something more permanent. If me on this, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man their father is. Her voice never wavered. This wasn't emotional Sarah making threats in the heat of the moment. This was someone who'd spent hours planning the systematic dismantling of everything I cared about, and she was going to do it with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else. I never saw it coming because I never really saw her. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. Sarah kept her word about not destroying my reputation publicly, but word got around anyway. Her family, my coworkers, our mutual friends, the other parents at school pickups. I went from being Sarah's husband to being the guy who cheated on Sarah with someone from her own family reunion. The details got distorted as they spread. Some people thought Rachel was Sarah's sister. Others heard I'd been having affairs for years. A few claimed I'd stolen money to pay for hotels. The truth was bad enough, but the rumors made me into some kind of serial predator, who'd been secretly destroying my family for years. I moved into a studio apartment across town. It came furnished with a Murphy bed and a kitchenette that smelled like the previous tenant's cigarettes. After 8 years in our 4-bedroom house with the big yard and the tire swing I'd hung for Emma, living in 500 square feet felt like being buried alive. The supervised visits were held at a community center downtown every other Saturday. Emma wouldn't look at me for the first month. She'd sit in the corner reading books while Jake played with the donated toys, both of them waiting for the 2 hours to end so they could go home to their mother. The supervisor, a tired woman named Mrs. Chen, would make notes on her clipboard about our interactions or lack thereof. Why did leave us, Daddy? Jake asked during our 3rd visit. He was building a tower with blocks, not looking at me while he waited for an answer I couldn't give him. I made a mistake. I said it was true but inadequate. Mommy says chose someone else over us. Emma said from her corner. She says that's what people do when they don't really love their family. What could I say to that? That I did love them, but I loved feeling important more. That I weigh everything that mattered for a few weekends with someone who saw me as a married man willing to cheat. Nothing more special than that. That their mother was right. I sat there in that sterile room with my kids who barely knew me anymore, surrounded by broken toys and the smell of industrial disinfectant, and realized this was my now. This was what I'd traded our Saturday morning pancakes and bedtime stories for. Sarah remarried 18 months later. A pediatrician named David who'd been divorced himself and understood what it meant to blend families carefully. I found out through Emma, who mentioned at one of our visits that David taught me to ride my bike without training wheels. The same bike I'd bought her for her birthday, the one I'd been planning to teach her to ride. They moved into a bigger house in a better school district. David's kids from his first marriage were close to Emma and Jake's ages, and suddenly my children had siblings and a father figure who didn't disappoint them every other weekend in a community center. Sarah sent me pictures through our parenting app, family vacations to Disney World, baseball games where David coached Jakey's little league team, Emma's school play where she played the lead and they were all in the front row cheering. The pictures weren't meant to me. Sarah was genuinely happy, and she wanted me to see that our kids were thriving. But scrolling through images of the family they'd built without me felt like watching someone else live the I'd thrown away. Rachel and I lasted another 6 months after my divorce was final. Without the thrill of sneaking around, without the fantasy that we were star-crossed lovers fighting against the world, we had nothing in common. She wanted someone exciting, someone who'd sweep her off her feet and take her away from her boring. I wanted someone who'd make me feel like I mattered. Neither of us was what the other actually needed. She broke with me over text while I was eating dinner alone in my studio apartment. "We're not the same person we're when we met," she wrote. "I think need to figure out who our before can be with anyone." The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman I destroyed my marriage for was dumping me because I wasn't exciting enough anymore. The affair that had made me feel like I was finally living had turned me into someone even the other woman didn't want. I tried dating after that, but it was. Every conversation started the same way. "So why did marriage end?" I tried various versions of the truth, but it all came down to the same thing. I was a 35-year-old divorced father who'd cheated on his wife at her family reunion. Not exactly a catch. The loneliness was crushing. I'd go days without talking other beyond ordering coffee or small talk with Mrs. Chen during visits. My coworkers were polite but distant. Sarah's friends had obviously been briefed to avoid me. My own friends had mostly been couple friends, and divorced cheaters don't get invited to dinner parties. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Martinez, who specialized in infidelity and divorce recovery. She asked hard questions about why I'd cheated, what I thought I was getting from Rachel that I wasn't getting from Sarah, how I justified the lies and deception to keep talking about feeling like an outsider, she said during one session. But made an outsider in own family. Chose to step outside marriage instead of working to feel more connected inside it. She was right, of course. I'd been so focused on feeling rejected by Sarah's family that I'd rejected my own family. I'd been so by overhearing that I was only invited out of pity that I'd given them every reason to pity me. The worst part was realizing how good my had actually been. Sarah loved me, flaws and all. My kids adored me. I had a stable job, a beautiful home, a future that looked bright and secure. I'd thrown it all away because I felt sorry for her at a family reunion, because I couldn't handle the bruise to my ego of being seen as an outsider. Now I was a real outsider. Now I knew what it actually felt like to not belong anywhere. Emma's 12 now, Jake is 9. They spend one weekend a month with me in my studio apartment, sleeping on an air mattress in the living room because there's no space for proper beds. They're polite but distant, the way kids are with relatives they don't know well. I'm becoming exactly what I thought I was at that reunion, someone they see out of obligation, someone who gets invited to their lives out of pity. Last month, Jake asked if he could call David Dad, because it was confusing having 2 dads but only living with one. Emma told me she was sorry but she didn't really remember much about when I lived with them anymore. Those 8 years of being their full-time father, tucking them in every night, reading bedtime stories, kissing scraped knees, teaching them to tie their shoes, all of it fading like it never happened. I sit in my studio apartment on the weekends they don't visit, scrolling through Sarah's social media posts of their new, and I understand now what I really lost. It wasn't just a wife and kids, it was belonging somewhere. It was being essential to someone else's happiness. It was having a place in the world that mattered. I away everything I ever wanted because I couldn't see that I already had it.